Yeah. All right. So let me give you I need to address something before I even start this message. The title of this sermon is, "What Does It Mean to Be a Living Sacrifice?" So here's the thing. Last night I'm kind of just finishing up before I go to bed, and I stumble across a sermonette given here by Mr. Murphy that's basically that title back in early January. And I want to get him off the hook. If you remember that title or something about living sacrifice, it was given in a message here. It was John Murphy back on January 11th. This is just purely coincidental. Pure coincidental. So don't think, hey, he's talking on this, Mr. Murphy talked about, so maybe these are connected. Absolutely not. They're absolutely coincidentally connected. So leave that to Christ. That's his job. And so that's the caveat that I start with today, just in case, as you hear this topic unfold, something rings a bell for you. So I'm going to make a statement now that's a little bit bold. Maybe some of you will say, yeah, right away. Yeah, you know what? I actually think that's true. Here's my statement. We are living today in the Laodicean age. The evidence is overwhelming. What does the Scripture say? What's one of the hallmarks of the Laodicean era? If you remember the Scripture in Revelation, where it says basically in Revelation 3:15, "I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot." What's that leave in terms of a mind idea for you? If for me, what it leaves is the idea of apathy. You're not cold, you're not hot, you don't care. If you cared enough about something, you'd be completely cold towards it, or you'd be completely hot towards it, but you wouldn't be absolutely indifferent. What's the opposite of love? It isn't hate, it's indifference. I just don't care. That's a hallmark of the Laodicean era. That's a hallmark of the times that we live in today. Which of us doesn't know this fundamental truth? We're affected by the society we live in the church. Same as anybody in the world, we're also affected. So if we're affected by the times that we live in, it's, I think, important as we begin to look at the subjects that relate towards pre-Passover preparation. How am I affected? Am I affected? Well, to some degree, I think we'd have to all admit, yeah, I'm affected, but I don't know to maybe what depth I'm affected by that. Am I apathetic about my spiritual growth? God has called us out of this world, and He's put us into a process of change. When we were baptized, we buried the old man. I put man in quotes for the ladies who've been baptized. Clearly for either of us, that's the same thing. Man or woman, we bury the old person, the old self. And we begin a process of change. Today we're going to be spending some time in Romans chapter 12, because Paul describes this process of change, a process in which we give our lives to God as a living sacrifice. He calls this our reasonable service. Phrases like living sacrifice, reasonable service, what do those mean for us on this journey of change we're supposed to be going through? We're going to be examining that today. I want to begin with Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. We're going to read 1 and 2. It says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Romans 1 and 2, if you were to go back and read again Romans from the very beginning of Romans chapter 1 and verse 1 all the way through 11, Paul basically lays out all of the doctrines, fundamentally, that he lays out in Hebrews. He lays those out very carefully and methodically and meticulously through the first 11 chapters of Romans. We get to Romans chapter 12, and Paul switches gears, and he moves from here's what the doctrines are to practical application. What should these look like in the life of a Christian? And he begins to introduce this new practical application in these very two first verses here. And there's a lot packed into them. I'm going to try to unpack a little bit of it because it lays a foundation for what comes next. He implores us emphatically to give ourselves as a living sacrifice. And he calls that our reasonable service. What does that mean? Paul tends to have words and language like that where you often ask yourself, what does that mean? I do that a lot when it comes to the writings of Paul. What is he talking about there? He does take a bit of study to understand. Let's begin with this question. What is a sacrifice? I mean, really, what's a sacrifice? Well, we're talking here the Second Temple era. There can be no doubt when Paul uses the word sacrifice that he's talking about an animal when there are daily sacrifices happening at the temple where animals are sacrificed as offerings. This isn't some mythological idea or concept that people are estranged to. They know exactly what he means when he says sacrifice. So what's a sacrifice? It's when an animal is killed. And what happens in a sacrifice? The animal dies as an offering. Okay? He dies instantly, does he not? Of course. Does he have a choice? No. In this case, the animal doesn't have a choice. He says the word to be a living sacrifice. Okay, so what does it mean to be a living sacrifice? Because if a sacrifice dies, and we're supposed to sacrifice but not die then, because we're supposed to be a living sacrifice. What does that mean? Well, it applies, first of all, to whom Paul has already addressed, and he calls them brethren. Who is he calling a brethren? Except for brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. Us. The same as them. Us. Today. So he's talking to us. Fellow firstfruits. He says we're to give our life in sacrifice to God. The difference is that our sacrifice is ongoing. That's what it means to be living as a sacrifice. It is ongoing. Our sacrifice is not finished until we have completely given our lives as an offering, which is when we are dead, or when Christ returns. From here until there, every single day, we give our life as a sacrifice, an offering to God. Paul is not speaking in language he doesn't thoroughly understand what he's saying. Turn over with me, if you will, to Philippians chapter 2 and verse 17. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 17, where Paul says, yes, and if I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. This is a metaphor for life. When you think about something being poured out as a drink offering, pouring is the concept here. I think of when I pour myself a glass of water. Unless I want the water all over the place, I'm going to carefully pour the glass of water so that it stays in the cup. And that's the concept of something larger pouring out over time. So whatever that is, it's pouring out over time. And that's what Paul's saying. But his life is what he's describing as an offering to God that's poured out over time. So the metaphor, the imagery is non-mistakable. Later, towards the end of his life, he writes to Timothy in his second epistle to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 4, in verse 6. So earlier in his life, in his ministry, he's saying, I am currently pouring out my life. And as we get to the end of his ministry, 2 Timothy 4 and verse 6, where he says, for I am already being poured out. The final drops are coming to him now. He's the last of what he has to give. He's at the end of his life. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. The end is near. I'm almost done. My sacrifice will be complete when he is dead. He understood that. So he's basically telling us in Romans, you too, brothers and sisters, have to give your life as a living sacrifice, an offering, ongoing throughout the entire time that you live until you die. That's the commitment we make at baptism. That's why it's a serious process. That's why we don't do that cavalierly. The person who says that they're willing to do that, that's serious business, and we take it seriously because of that. The difference between us, as I mentioned, and a sacrificial animal is that the animal doesn't have any choice. We do. God puts that choice in front of us, and he wants us to choose that, to choose to live that way. But why should we do that? Go back to Romans chapter 12, because he tells us in the same breath. Romans chapter 12, where he says, which is your reasonable service. The end of that verse. That is our reasonable service. What does that mean? That's our reasonable service. Thayer's defines reasonable as pertaining to reason or logic. Robertson's word pictures and Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown define the term as rational. The word irrational, which means against logic, is the exact opposite of rational, which means logical. So the word reasonable means rational. It's logical. To who? Might say, I don't know if it's that logical to me. It's logical to God. It's rational to God. The term service is defined by Thayer as the worship of God. It's easy for us first to stop with service and say, hang on a second, is that what I'm doing? Like what I do at church every single day to help somebody, or helping the little old lady across the street and I'm serving her. Is that what he's talking about? That's our reasonable service. And he's saying, no, it's not in that sense. No, he'll use that word later. In this context, what he's saying is worship. How we worship God. And that worship, God wants to be logical, rational. See, the God that called us out of this world, who made us first fruits, wants to be worshiped the way he wants to be worshiped. And to him, that's rational. We should choose that rationally. Like, why wouldn't you? It doesn't make sense not to. It would be irrational if you didn't. That's where God is. What is our rational worship then? It is to be a living sacrifice. So the two are very connected, as you can see. Over the whole time, the duration of my life, I'm going to give my life in sacrifice to God. I'm choosing to do that as a rational worship, in rationally worshiping God. That's the only logical thing to do. All right, that's the foundation. But what does it mean to be a living sacrifice practically? Well, that's the question. I mean, these are big terms, right? So, okay, I kind of understand conceptually what you mean, but every day, get up every day and be a living sacrifice. What's that even look like? That's the point. What does that look like? Well, that's what Paul's saying. He's going to tell us what that looks like. Verse 2 of Romans chapter 12. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Our reasonable service, our rational worship has nothing to do with the ways of the world. God does not want to be worshiped the way the world does it. Instead, he wants our worship to come from the heart by a transformation in our lives. If our lives have not transformed from conforming to the ways of the world, our worship will not be rational to God. Does that make sense? The world is filled with people who worship God irrationally. I want to worship God the way I want to worship God. So what that basically means is that I want a relationship with God that's on my terms, not on God's terms. And God doesn't want that relationship. He wants a relationship to be on his own terms. We transform our lives so that we may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The word prove means discern. It means to be able to understand by application. In other words, you do, then you understand. Mr. Armstrong used to talk about that years ago, right? First we get them doing it, and then they'll understand it. We try to do that with our kids when we're teaching them things too. You don't understand right now, but you will one day. It'll make sense to you later. But here's how I want you to do it, and do it that way. And then later they understand it when they move out, usually. Okay? That's normally the way it is for us. I remember when Renee called us after she moved out with Micah, and boy, she called her mom right away, and basically it's this: you were right about a lot of things. Yeah, you're always dumb until they move out. Anyway, yeah, I'm kind of picking on some of the YAs in the room, and if you don't like being called a YA, young adults, or I know who you are and you know who I am, so yeah, I'm picking on you guys a little bit. All right. Understanding the will of God begins with rejecting the ways of the world and transforming our lives as a living sacrifice to God, because that's our reasonable service. That's our rational worship. All right? What does it mean to conform? I think of conforming because in the industry I come from, we make tanks, and those tanks are made from a form. So we take a form and we put some stuff into that form, and then after it's baked, you know what comes out of it? Something that looks like what? The form. Because the stuff conforms to the shell. It conforms to that pattern, which is what he's talking about here. Conform means to be similar or identical, to be in agreement or harmony, to be obedient or compliant, to act in accordance with prevailing standards or customs. Our carnal human nature naturally conforms and, in fact, wants to conform to the ways of this world. Transform, to change in composition or structure, to change the form or appearance of, to change in character or condition, to convert. We're supposed to transform our lives. And each of these applies, and you can sort of put them together as an amalgamation of what transform means. How do we transform our lives? What does Romans 12:2 say? By the renewing of your mind. You transform your life by the renewing of your mind. I don't really like that word renew very well because it's confusing to me. So when you think of the word renew, what do you think of? The word re means again, new, right? Do you take something that was in one condition when you got it, and if I want it renewed, do I want it to look differently? Or do I want it to look like it did when I bought it? And if I want it renewed, I want it to look new again. Okay? That's what the word renew means. And that's not really an accurate translation of this, because that's not what the word actually means. Think of it this way. When I was baptized, when you were baptized, you buried that old man in the water. When you came back up out of the water, does God want that man made new? No. He wants that man changed. That's why that word renew doesn't work very well. It implies that, well, let's pull that man up out of the water. Let's make him look like new. Like, well, what he was when he was new wasn't good. Because, what does he say? What does the scripture say? In Romans chapter 8, just go back over a couple of verses, a couple of chapters. Romans chapter 8, 5 through 7. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. That's flesh equal world. For those who live according to the world set their minds on the things of the world. But those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity against God. For it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. That's our natural. We want to conform to the world, not to God. Enmity means being actively opposed or hostile to someone or something. That someone is God. That something is God's way of life. Our natural carnal man doesn't want anything to do with that. So does God want us to renew that man? He wants us to do something different, to transform that man. A better translation for renew is renovate or remodel in the definition. To renovate or remodel. I had a friend of mine down in Vancouver who loaned an individual some money to build a house or to remodel his house, and it turned out that the remodel of that house ended up being building a different house right next door that wasn't to code. So my friend, who's an architect, had to actually remodel the remodel. And at the time, I went there to work part-time to help him to do that. That's the first time I'd ever done that. Some of you I know work in the construction field and know exactly what it means to remodel something. Some people like me, we didn't grow up that way. So that was an eye-opener on what it is to remodel. It's not renewing, especially if you buy something dilapidated that you plan that you'd like it to have some value. You're going to remodel. That usually means something far different than just to renew. So from here, so this is the foundation for everything else that Paul is going to talk to that's after here. We're going to be skipping the immediate stuff that's after because the stuff that comes after is the easy stuff. So what Paul covers next is he covers the gifts in the church. This is a great corollary chapter to 1 Corinthians chapters 12 and 13. This passage, especially Romans 12 and 13, they are very nice corollaries really from 1 Corinthians 11 through 13. There's a difference between them because in 1 Corinthians, we see Paul chastising a people. But when it comes to Romans, he's not chastising. He's very encouraging, and here's how you do it. And this is what you want to avoid. Very different attitude towards the individuals that he's writing to. And the part that he covers next is gifts given to the church. I encourage you to read through it because it talks about the obligations we have when God gives us gifts and how we are to use those to serve each other in the church. And in fact, Paul doesn't leave the idea, even in our own personal spiritual walk, of our obligations in the church to each other. He connects that idea constantly throughout the remainder of this chapter, throughout the remainder of a lot of this book. But specifically, he talks about the obligations of those who have been given gifts in the church, and he talks about that, I believe, for a reason. They're easy. You don't have to think about a gift. If you've got a gift, usually you make it look easy to everyone else. When you find yourself saying something like, anybody can do this, usually that's no. Usually no. If it's that easy for you, and I think about that for guitar players. A good buddy of mine, Marty Henderson, plays the guitar, acoustical guitar. He's very good at it. He makes it look easy. When I lived in Alaska, he made it look so easy, I bought a guitar. Like, if Marty can do this, I can do this, because Marty said, if he can do it, anyone can do it. You know, no. I tried for like 6 months, and I always felt like I was trying to unfold a broken lawn chair every time I picked up a guitar. And so I just finally said, that's enough of that. He had a gift for that. I don't, so I had to admit that. All right, so that's what my point is. So you don't have to think about it, in other words. When Paul gets done with the gifts, and he talks about how we're to use those to bind each other, remember this. We are collectively the bride of Christ. Do you think Christ, when he returns, wants to find his bride a dysfunctional individual who can't get along, who can't figure out the slightest elements of peace and happiness and joy being together? He wants a functional wife, not a dysfunctional wife. He begins with the elements of gifts in terms of how do you create a functional wife filled with unity and love? Well, God gave you gifts in part to do that, to help with that. He moves past that. So that's a whole sermon. I don't have time to give you that one. I'm going to move past that as we think about Passover to where he begins in chapter 9, or verse 9 of chapter 12. We're going to move on to that area because this is the beginning of our renovation project, our remodel project of our spiritual minds. We're not renewing that spiritual being that came up out of there. We're going to remodel. That's what we're going to be doing. And verse 9, Paul begins with the foundation. Romans 12, verses 9. Let love be without hypocrisy. For those who've done remodel work, if you buy a dilapidated piece of property that you want to one day remodel and sell as something of value, the first thing you check is the foundation. You know why? Because if I've got some dry rot upstairs, the whole foundation's not likely to fall down. But if I've got a problem with the foundation, the whole structure can collapse. We begin with the foundation. It's got to be sound. And what is the foundation? He says, love. Let love be without hypocrisy. If you follow Paul's writings, Paul is going to talk about love, hope, and faith consistently. He comes back to them over and over and over again. They are the three great virtues of being a Christian: love, faith, hope. What's the greatest of them? Love, right? Love is the greatest of these. You know, in the English language, we have one word for love. I love my wife. I love my kids. What do I love? I love all kinds of things. In what way do you use the word love when you describe something that you have deep affection for? Do you use a weird word for love that we're not aware of? Or do you just say you love it? So how do I know if when you're talking about, I don't know, your favorite musical instrument, that you love that instrument? Or, you know, I joke that I love my truck, something like that. How do you know that I'm talking about a different kind of love than my wife? Well, we hope that's true, right? But I need a context in the English language. Like, how exactly do you mean that love? Family love? Do you mean, brotherly love? Well, the Greeks, they don't have that problem because they have words that they distinguish between types of love. That helps us to understand rapidly what they mean. For example, the Greeks use the word eros, E-R-O-S, to express sensual or romantic love. This is the kind of love that's reserved for a man and wife in a marriage relationship. Yes, I said it out loud. I know, right? In Seattle. That takes courage. I know, but I did it. Storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, storge. That expresses familial love. It's natural love. It's the love that you feel for your parents naturally. When you're a child, you're born, you love your mom, your dad. It's the parent. More accurately, think of it as the feelings that you might have towards siblings. It's a natural relationship. That love, it's different than friendship. Some siblings are friends. Some siblings love each other even though they're not friends, but they'd still be there for each other. So there's a difference between familial love and friendship love. The next type of love is philia, P-H-I-L-I-A. That expresses brotherly love, friendship, camaraderie. It's the most universal term that's used for love in the Greek language. So that tends to mean a lot more of those kinds of things we would use for those sorts of relationships that we care a lot about. But it's not the deepest kind of love. It certainly expresses affection, but it's not the deepest kind of love. That's reserved for the term agape. Agape, A-G-A-P-E. In the Greek, it means unconditional love. But to God, that's not good enough. So God co-opted that word. If you go through 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and I encourage you to do that, and study every single description of what agape is and what it is not, that is a very rich and deep and detailed study, because every single word has meaning to it in terms of defining this term, because God doesn't accept unconditional love as the only way to describe agape. He's so much more than that. It's so much larger than that. So the word agape, co-opted by God, means a lot more, but it defines who God is. And the word Paul uses in Romans 12:9 is agape. That word is to be our foundation. It's to form the foundation of our spiritual temple. Agape, more than unconditional love, it is the love that defines who God is. And therefore, it's the word that should define who we are. So Paul says here that we're to have that love as our foundation. In our spiritual renovation project, we are to make sure that our spiritual house is built on the foundation of agape love. That we take on the attribute that defines who God is and the attribute that defines who we are. But did you notice that he added something to it? What did he say? But that love should be without hypocrisy. Why? We should have that love, that should be the foundation, but it should be without hypocrisy. He could have said a lot of things, right? Let that love be deeply felt. Let it be outwardly expressed. Let it, whatever. He could have said all kinds of things, but he didn't say all kinds of things. He said, let your foundation be without hypocrisy. I think that's going to make sense to you here in just a minute or two. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines hypocrisy this way: a feigning to be what one is not, or to believe what one does not believe. Behavior that contradicts what one claims to believe or feel. It's a facade. It's what you see, but not what's real. That's hypocrisy. Look, in the church, I don't think anybody here would doubt this. If you grew up in the church, you understand innately what I'm about to say. The younger people in the church have a hard time with hypocrisy because they grow up in a church that they have been told since they were babies that this is the church of God. This church is filled with converted people. And in a church filled with converted people, the young person says, then there shouldn't be any sin. So if they see somebody in trouble in the church, somebody who's done something wrong, it's hard for them. They think of that as hypocrisy. That person's a hypocrite. They say they believe in God, but then why are they doing that? Okay? So we get that in the church pretty good. Most of us do. Most of anybody who grew up in the church understands innately what that means and why that's challenging for young people to get over. It takes a long time, especially through baptism and counseling for baptism. They got to get over this hurdle. Paul chose hypocrisy because the hypocrite is only concerned with him or herself. The objective of the hypocrite is to make themselves look good to others, despite how they actually feel or how they actually look. This is not genuine love. It cannot be genuine if it's a facade of love. I want you to see that I'm a loving person in the church, but what's behind that is maybe not. Well, I don't want you to see what's behind that because I want to be accepted. So I want that facade to look good. That's hypocrisy. The hypocrite looks at remodeling their spiritual temple in terms of what others see, not on what actually changed. They deceive themselves in the belief that if others cannot see the flaws in their remodel, that they might be doing okay. That's really the danger of hypocrisy. You might begin to believe it yourself. The facade. I remember, when I think about this idea, I remember when my kids were growing up. Some of you young adults are really going to relate to this. I would tell, look, when you're young, let's just put the category someplace between 8 and 10. All right? And when you're young, and mom or dad says, hey, you're not going outside, or you're not playing this, or you're not doing that, whatever that is that they want to do, you know they want to do it, right? Real bad. And so as a parent, you know that, you're going to use that as leverage. You're not doing that you want to do until you clean your room. Because you walked by this morning and you saw the tornado effect of what their room looks like. You young adults can't possibly appreciate what a parent does when they bought the house and they put you in that room that used to look good. And now it looks like you were in there for some period of time, destroying it. And so we say, would you go clean your room? Well, no, I don't want to clean my room. You're not playing or you're not doing the thing you want to do until you clean your room. So what do? What happens in the cleaning project of your room? Well, I know this. It seems to take very little time. And so I would be distracted or something, or my wife would be distracted, and the kid comes out and they're like, okay, I've cleaned my room. You look at your watch or you look at the clock on the wall and you realize, how thoroughly could you possibly have cleaned the room in 10 minutes? I mean, seriously. So let's go look at this cleaning project. And so you open the bedroom door and there's nothing on the floor. What is in the mind of the child? If you can't see it, it must be clean. So what do you do as a parent? Where's the first place you look? Say it out loud. Under the bed. Every parent knows. The first place you go is under the bed. And since most of you young adults have done this, you also know that's the first place you're looking when you've got kids. Okay? Because you know what you did. And so we go and we lift the thing and you look under the bed and there's all kinds of things under there. Couldn't see it from the door, so we have to go look under the bed. Because you stood at the door and looked. You didn't see it, so you figured, we're not going to see it. So we go look under the bed. Where's the second place we look? Closet. Why would we look there? Apparently children are not capable of processing the idea that just because the door's closed, Doesn't mean we're not going to look in there. So you open the closet, and all the kinds of things either tumble out, but they certainly are there. So all the stuff that was supposed to be put away is where? Not put away. It's in all kinds of places where it's not supposed to be. So we have to teach you the lesson of, we don't believe the facade that you gave us of your room cleaning. That's all that is. It's a facade. You want us to think it looks clean because I open the door and I look around and it looks clean. That's what Paul's talking about. You want me to think it looks clean. So you got some of the debris that's not supposed to be there out of the way so that I can't see it, and therefore it must be clean. See, God's just like we are. He's going to look under the bed. He's going to pull back the comforter on the bed. And he's going to look under there to see what's there. Because some of you know that when it comes to making your bed, what that means is to pull the blanket up. You don't have to worry about the sheets if the blanket's up and kind of looks made. God's going to pull that back and look to see if the bed's made. He's going to look under the bed to see if there's stuff jammed in there that shouldn't be there. He's going to open the closet to see if things are there that shouldn't be there. God doesn't believe the facade. This is the difference. This is what he's talking about hypocrisy. Our love has to be genuine. No fake, no facades. Has to be real, 100%. Each of us has to look deeply into our closets, under our own beds. Agape love is to be the foundation of our lives, and as such, it must be genuine. Because everything else in our lives is going to be built on that foundation. Everything will be built on that foundation, so it's got to be right. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It can't be, because we're not perfect beings, but we've got to be working on that as a priority. Love first in our lives. I encourage you to go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and read through that whole chapter. Read through it again before Passover. It will encourage you on this subject. How's my foundation? What's it look like? Is it working? You can't fake this kind of love because it's only possible to have agape love indwelling in you through the Holy Spirit. That's the only way we can have it. That means that the only way that we can lose it is if we give it away. If we don't care for it, if we don't nurture it. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful for us, is because it's indwelling in us as a gift of God through the power of his Holy Spirit. All right. Where does he go from here? Verse 9. Where does he go from here? The very next statement, because he begins, remember, with let love be without hypocrisy. And the very next thing he says, because if you want to know whether or not there's any hypocrisy lingering in this remodel project, he says, abhor what is evil. Okay. I'm looking here at my spiritual temple, and he's saying, do you abhor evil? Oh, sure I do. I abhor overtly expressed evil. Don't we all? Somebody broke into my truck this morning. Rob came in to get me to go out to leave, and he says, you're going to want to come out here. So I go out there, and there's a sheriff out there because somebody broke into the car down the street too. So they called him. And he came over and he said, anything missing? And you just have to look in the window to see my whole center dash of the thing is pulled forward, and they stole my stereo out of there, the radio out of there. We're supposed to abhor evil. Do I hate that guy? Do I hate him? Is that what he's talking about? You hate the person? We're supposed to abhor evil. I hate evil when I see it overtly expressed. Turn on the news. Anymore, it's hard to turn the news on. Is it not? Honestly. There's a lot of evil out there. I mean, I don't want to hear another story of a school shooting or a mall shooting or some other scenario in which somebody dresses up in a military garb or something else, packs firearms, and starts killing innocent people. It's heartbreaking. Okay? Do I hate that evil? Do you? Of course we do. That's easy. Right? You can get righteously indignated about that kind of evil. You read about young ladies being kidnapped and forced into the sex trades internationally, or you hear about the evil of the drug trades and what's happening to families and small children across the border. It's horrifying. I can hate that evil. So yes, I hate evil. I abhor that evil. But he added an element about the love that is our foundation when he said it can't have any hypocrisy in it. Do I have any hypocrisy on this issue? I know some of this gets a little close to home. It is going to for all of us. Paul's poking us in some tender places here, because this is about us building a genuine temple for the Holy Spirit. We're supposed to be remodeling our lives, not making our old self new, but making a new man. That new man wants to be in the kingdom of God, right? Well, what's that remodel project look like? And he says, okay, well, if we've got the hypocrisy out, do you really? Has this ever happened to you? I'm confident that this has happened to all of us, most of us anyway. If you're over the age of 16, surely this has happened. I'm not sure under that age, and I'm sorry about that if you're under 16. It's this. You're listening to a song, you really love this song. Now, when you're my age, you listen to the song and you're always listening to what's he singing about. What are the words? Because at some point in my life, I'm singing along blindly to a song that's talking about premarital sex. Cavalierly, and I'm just singing to the top of my lungs right in the car. And then one day you stop and you go, what did he just say? Hang on a second. How could I possibly, all these years, have been singing along to this song? I just love this song. I've always loved this song. And that's what they're singing about? That's what this song is about? It's either premarital sex, or it's drug, or it's, it's adultery. There's lots of that. Murder. There's some songs out there actually about murder. And I'm humming right along. Okay, do you abhor what is evil? Well, apparently, if it has a good beat, not so bad. Apparently not. So that's what he's asking. Do you abhor evil? You need to look in your closets. Yeah, that's going to mean some changes probably. Like, what am I listening to? I'm in there, I'm working away. The stereos, if you've been on a construction project, you know this is what it's like. Somebody's got a radio and it is blasting at 100 decibels because if you're upstairs, you can't really hear it that well. So somebody's playing a radio out there. And there I am singing along and I'm filling it up. Well, if that's the kind of music that I'm filling my spiritual remodel project with, how good is that for me? He's saying, let love be without hypocrisy. Therefore, do I abhor evil? Then get all the evil out. Don't tolerate a little bit of evil. Don't tolerate evil. Period. No hypocrisy. Movies? Really? TV shows are more popular today than movies. Series, right? Because a movie is 2.5 hours and you're done. A series is going to last for, 12 to 15 of those. And is there a series you could turn on that you don't want to turn off after the first 5 or 10 minutes? Because you can't hardly find one that's not gratuitous sex, violence, drugs, whatever. That's not what the title said, right? So you start watching it and you're hoping, and then all of a sudden, blammo! Do I abhor evil? Click. Find something else. Even in an innocent show, there's some. My wife and I, we went ahead and I got rid of Netflix, and we're doing BritBox. There's lots of fun British shows that I just love. There's some older series even that well, they're not that old, a few years old. But even though they don't show it, they allude to it as being perfectly acceptable and fine. And that is, all dating equals premarital sex. If you're not having sex, you're not dating. That's apparently, according to just about every show now, that's the rule. So the only way we know if you're in a relationship is if you're actually having sex. If you're not having sex, then you're just friends. It's very upside down. That's just the way that it is, apparently. Now, that's according to the movies. I don't know if that's real life anymore. At some point, is that leading or is it lagging society? Hard to tell. Do I abhor what is evil? In all its forms, not just the overt stuff. If you youngins, you young adults, want a treat, go back and watch like an episode of Leave It to Beaver. In those days, those shows were made so that they proffered the highest esteemed values of families. And so the goofy things that were going on between Beaver and his brother and mom and dad were always just what we would think would be normal in the church. Like, isn't that the way it's supposed to be? Like, they have problems, but it isn't Beaver's being molested by someone and that's okay, or Beaver's having premarital sex and that's okay. It's none of that. It's all just innocence. The way, it's not to say they were perfect, but when they sinned, it was understandable types of sins that you would think about. So it's just very different today. All right. What's the other side of this coin? Well, the end of this verse, he simply says, cling to what is good. The word cling means glue. When I think of the word cling, normally my mind is like, you're on a rope and you're clinging to this rope, and eventually the strength of your hands wears out. So the sort of joke about that is when you get to the end of your rope, tie a knot, because maybe that'll help you to hold on. That's not the sense of this. The sense of this is to become bonded to, a permanent bond to what is good. That's what he's talking about. Just if you want to reference scripture that really quickly, Philippians 4:8. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Think about it this way. The cup that's already full, it's hard to fill it up with something else. So fill your cup up with these things. That's what he's saying. Fill your temple with these things. It's hard for Satan to come along and fill it up with something else if it's already full. Okay? That's the point of that. All right. Verse 10. Of Romans chapter 12. Went right by it. Okay, verse 10. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another. So, you ever notice how Paul sometimes writes and it sounds like he's saying the same thing three ways about the same thing? And this kind of looks like that's what he's doing. That is not what he's doing. It's just the way that it's translated. This has everything to do with who we surround ourselves with. The first phrase, kindly affectionate, is not used anywhere else in the entire New Testament. So this is a unique term. It's a contraction of words by Paul. The word kindly doesn't refer to being nice. That's not how it's used. In this context, kind is used here in the same way of animals being after a kind. Cattle or a cow is after the cattle kind. Okay? A cat is after the cat kind. That is the kind that this is talking about. So of a kind, be affectionate. What kind is he talking about? The term affectionate comes from the root word storge. It implies a familial relationship. So the kind then is a spiritual family. That's what that word implies. Be kindly affectionate. Be a spiritual family. That's what he's saying. And to the members of that family, what does he say? Have brotherly love. So remember, in natural families, siblings may not necessarily feel brotherly love towards each other. They might have a natural bond in terms of storge love, which is natural familial bonds. Likewise in the church. It's hard for me to say that I have brotherly love to someone I don't even know. But I can have storge, this sort of spiritual familial love towards them, which is natural. Spiritually, because we're bound by the Spirit. Okay? That's why when you go into church someplace where you've never been before, you feel at home. Normally. I felt that many times. I'm sure some of you have too. We went to Amsterdam last March. My wife and I had never been there before. But you go in, it feels like home. You can be almost anywhere in the world and feel at home because we have a shared bond, a spiritual bond that makes us spiritual family. Paul is saying then you need to have brotherly love towards one another in your spiritual family. Now he says at the end of that, in honor, giving preference to one another. So what he's saying then is, who do you surround yourself with? You're building your spiritual temple. You're remodeling your spiritual temple. There are those in your life who are going to help you, and there are those who will hinder you. Sometimes the hindrance is simply ignorance on their part. But if you're out, if all of the friends that you surround yourself with are friends who don't believe the same way that you believe, think of it this way. Are you more or less likely to adopt bad behavior from someone else, or are they more likely to adopt your good behavior? What does Paul say? Paul says this way in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. First Corinthians 15:33 very simply states this: do not be deceived, evil company corrupts good habits. This is well known. So the young person, I don't care who it is, young or old, who can say, well, I'm not affected by that. Paul is saying, yes, you are. We all are. You can't help it. That's why I began this message the way that we did. Are we affected by the society that we live in? Yes, we are. We have to be aware of that. Evil company corrupts good habits. If I'm hanging around people who are using the F word constantly, and they notice that I'm not, do they stop? No. My good behavior is not changing their bad behavior. Why not? It doesn't say good habits corrupt evil company. It says the opposite happens to us. And if we want a genuine house built on love, we need to be aware of what influences around us will take away from that, will be a detriment, will hinder that process. And he's saying, be careful who you surround yourself with. Who do you spend your time with? He's not saying, because elsewhere he says, look, I'm not telling you have to come out of the world, because then you couldn't live anywhere then. But be aware of what's going on in the world. Yes, you're going to have friends that are in the world. I have friends that are in the world, but I understand the limitation of the difference between what they believe and what I believe. I try not to consume enormous amounts of what they believe. It can only corrupt my good habits. So I have to limit that contact. I love them where they are, but I can't take a whole bunch of that in here, or it's going to change what my spiritual temple looks like. Verse 11 of Romans 12. Not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Here Paul addresses our attitude towards our remodel, okay? He's going to address our attitude towards our remodel. If you want a good context for what this is, because this is talking about, do we have a sense of urgency? Okay? Look, it's easy when we think Christ is delayed in his return. How much easier are we to let our guard down? A good corollary for us is to go back and look at what happened during the original rebuilding of the Second Temple. What happened? Do you think that happened overnight? It did not. And why not? And what did God have to say about that, and what was happening to them? Because it's a corollary for us we need to be on guard for. I'm going to give you just a beef bit of beef. I'm going to give you some beef, apparently. I don't even have any beef, but I'm going to give you some. Ask Rob about the Star Trek thing we did down at Orlando early on in our marriages, and I basically did the same thing on live camera. I have such great legacies. We're going to be going to the book of Haggai, but before you go there, I want to give you a brief bit of background. In 539 BC, Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon. Now, in 538 BC, he issued a decree. So this was in order of God's promise. It said, after 70 years of captivity, you will be able to return. So it was Cyrus who issued the decree that allowed Judah to return to the promised land. Zerubbabel was sent as the governor to take those captives in Babylon that wanted to return back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Joshua was the high priest that was sent with him. But the temple was not completed until 515 BC. Why did it take so long? Well, we have the answer given in part by the prophet Haggai. But keep this in mind. After Cyrus, Darius took the throne in 522. All right, so how long is that? 538 to 522, so 16 years? Okay. Haggai prophesies to Zerubbabel and Joshua in the second year of King Darius. So now this is 23 years after they'd been sent back to rebuild the temple, 23 years later. It's not like they had to build this thing from the ground up. It was largely still intact. So this was a remodel of the temple. Renewing would be a great way to look at that one. But this is a remodel of the temple. Okay. Excuse me, 16, 17, 8. Yeah, so 20, I'm trying to get the math here. 23 years is the net. All right, sorry, I got off a little bit on the math. Some of you are going to correct me on that later. That'll be fine. Haggai chapter 1 and verse 1. Nope, too far. I'll get there. Hang tough. I don't have my tab Bible anymore. All right. Haggai chapter 1 and verse 1. In the second year of King Darius, in the 6th month, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah. The governor sent back from Babylon to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. He was the boss. He was the governor underneath the Persian Empire. And to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So here's the word of the Lord through Haggai to these two men. Thus speaks the Lord of hosts, saying, this people says. So this is what's in the heart of the people. And God is pulling that out and then feeding it back to them through Zerubbabel and Joshua. The people say to themselves, the time has not come that the Lord's house should be built. Then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses, and this temple to lie in ruins? Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to be put in a bag with holes. What you're doing is absolutely worthless. It means nothing. All you're doing is looking after yourself. Well, my temple lies in ruins. That's why I sent you back. Rebuild the temple. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Go up to the mountains and bring wood and build the temple, that I may take pleasure in it and be glorified. Can we be the same? Distracted from this project? Absolutely. Not putting a priority on the work that needs to be done on myself. Why? It might be hard. I might have to really tackle something I don't want to tackle. It might just be easier to go play some more for a while. And God is saying that's not the job. That's worthless. Build the temple, because that's going to be enduring. That's what's going to get you into the kingdom. All the stuff today, the distractions, that's not what's going to do it. Go back and read Ezra chapters 4 through 6, I think it is, and find out all the things that were roadblocking them. There were adversities. There's no doubt about it. Excuse me, I think it's 6 through 8. Ezra 6 through 8. We can be distracted because there's so much stuff out there. Entertainment, things to own, games to play, places to go. Lots of things can become important to us that have nothing to do with whether we're actually remodeling our spiritual temple. That's what he's talking about here. Do you have a sense of urgency? If Jesus Christ returned tomorrow and you were off lollygagging, in other words, I'm off there doing something else that was more fun because the remodel was just too hard. Okay. We need to have a sense of urgency. I understand that it can seem like Christ delays. That means we have to double down on our sense of urgency. Verse 12 of chapter 12 of Romans. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. These three statements all have one thing in common. Remember, we talked before about how Paul constantly comes back to the virtues that we need to have in our lives: faith, hope, love. He is specifically on point, rejoicing in hope. Here's the thing about hope. It necessarily must be about something unseen. If you have it, you don't hope for it. Okay? If you have it, you don't hope for it, or it is not hope. Go back to Romans 8, again. Romans 8:24, just a couple pages back. For we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. What is the hope we have that is not seen? It's the whole reason we do what we do. It's the entire reason that I'm willing to make my life a living sacrifice. I have hope in the kingdom of God. Real hope, tangible hope. My hope is as real as this podium because the kingdom of God is this real. It's this tangible, even though I can't see it. But my hope, my realistic expectation, which is the definition of hope, is in that kingdom, that I'm going to be in that kingdom. That when Jesus Christ returns, I will either be brought up out of the grave or I will meet him in the air, along with everyone else who is the first fruit. That's our hope. What does that hope do for our lives? What does that hope do for us in our remodeling project? It allows us to be patient when things appear to be at their worst. When everything's against us, when it's hard, and it looks like I might not make it. That hope, our vision of the kingdom, our belief in the tangible existence of God's kingdom, where we will one day be, that lets us be patient in that. It lets us endure what's really hard and get through it so we can complete this project, so we can be there. The second thing that he said to do was that it allows us to be instant in prayer. That's what the word means, continuing in prayer. It means to be instant in prayer. You know, this past Northwest Weekend down in Portland, where so many of you were not at, we'd love to have you come down. The theme, though, was having a godly focus. And one of the messages, I was asked to give one of the messages, and I was talking about how do we have a godly focus? In a short period of time, what can I tell you that will help us to have a godly focus? And it is to have and to intentionally put a priority on our relationship with God. You have to be intentional about that. And I think about it this way. If you're not intentionally doing something, you're intentionally not doing it. Because if it's important to you, you'll make sure it gets done. Otherwise, it's not important to you. If you want to put God first, be intentional about it. One of the ways we can do that is to be instant in prayer, which is what Paul means here. Instant means instant, in the moment. Yes, there is an absolutely appropriate time for us to go into our private place, into our closet, get on our knees before God and pray to Him earnestly. That's absolutely an appropriate prayer we should be doing regularly. But how do you be instant with that? If you want a relationship with God, when you're having difficult times, you need to talk to God right now, wherever that is, in the moment. Be instant. And that's what Paul's saying as a tool for us when it's hard. Let our hope encourage us to be instant in prayer. Talking to God. I don't want to give up. I'm up against it. This is hard. I need to get through this. I need your help. I'm not going to wait until tonight when I'm going to bed to kneel down and ask for that help. I'm going to ask for it right now. That's what he's talking about. And it's our hope that enables us to think about that and to prioritize that And to make sure that that's what we do, that that's how we have our relationship with God as we rebuild this temple. That we have him as a part of that every step of the way. And that we're talking to him because we have a relationship with him. And when we have needs, we need to make those needs known in the moment. That's what he's talking about. Be instant in prayer. And it's our hope. That's what binds those elements together. It's our hope that we're going to be there in God's kingdom when Christ returns. Verse 13 of Romans 12. Distributing to the needs of the saints. So the key to understanding what Paul means here is to realize that this has nothing to do with wealth. When my wife and I were first married, broke and poor, as most early married couples are, there's a lot of them. I mean, maybe not all of them, certainly not all of them. But we were. And I remember that the Portland East congregation, when we first had Rachel, there was a knitting group of, I presume ladies, okay? I mean, it was a lady that gave it to Becca. I don't know. Maybe there were guys in the group. I have no idea. I don't want to disparage any guys that are a part of knitting groups. If that's, if that helps you with stress or something, that's fine. I'm just saying in this particular case, I'm pretty sure it was a ladies' knitting group. So they knitted these wonderful blankets and gave it to my wife and us as a gift for our newborn baby. We didn't have anything, and they're wonderful. They're fantastic. You didn't have to be wealthy, and a lot of the ladies that were in the knitting groups were not wealthy women. They're just everyday Christians getting together, and one of the things that they liked to do was when they heard a baby was coming, some of you women can't hide that, when they see the evidence of that, find out that there's a baby coming, they would get together and they would make it their project to make a blanket for that family. I thought, well, that's a wonderful thing to do for the family, right? It's a beautiful way to connect to one another as a spiritual family, as Paul was talking about in so many ways. And so that's what Paul's talking about here in this context. You don't have to be rich in order to serve each other, in order to serve each other's needs. You just have to have your eyes open. And where you can, fill those needs for each other. That's a part of us being a spiritual family. And I guess I just want to make sure that you understand that there's a difference between this and the person who has means, who does give to the church, because that's, Paul talked about that under gifts, and you'll see that when you go back and review the earlier portion of this chapter where he talks about people who have means and how he wants those means to be used in the church. How God intends when he blesses us with money, in other words, if you've been blessed with money, what God expects of you or me or whoever. That's different than this. So I want to make sure that you understand that's why Paul's talking about this differently, because this is saying just because you don't have money doesn't mean that you can't serve, you can't help each other, that you can't look after the needs of the saints. Again, Paul is not saying that we should only care for our brothers and sisters in the faith, but that we should pay particular attention to them in priority. Just as a way to buttress that, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9. What did he say? Galatians 6 and verse 9. We live in this world, and, I live in a neighborhood, you live in a neighborhood. I have coworkers, you have coworkers, colleagues, and so forth. We need to be nice to those people, but what did he say here in Galatians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10? And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all. Okay? Yes, to everyone as we see need. Do you not think Satan is trying to anesthetize us against need? So that we might harden our hearts about that? Because if you drive down the street, I saw the video, something about Seattle is dying or something like that. And it's about the homeless problem in Seattle. Well, Seattle's not alone. Portland's got a massive problem. San Francisco's got a massive problem. Seattle's got everybody's got this problem. Somebody's on a street corner someplace with a sign. And I'm looking online and I'm saying to myself, okay, so are they genuine, right? Like, I want to help. You see somebody standing on the street corner who's got a sign that says, any little bit helps, and your heart goes out naturally. But do you want to be duped? None of us want to be duped by someone who's faking it. the percentage of people faking it is extremely high. I watched a guy, and this was in Florida someplace, and the young man did a video, and he said, okay, so this can't all be fraud. And he goes out into there, and he finds out that most of it is fraud, but it didn't start as fraud. But people get stuck, and then they start believing the lies they tell. And so one guy tells him, basically the guy is admitting, I'm not going to do something different because I can hang out at these 2 gas stations and I can go back and forth between these stations and ask for money, and I can make anywhere from $30 to $50 a day. That's all I need. I'm good. Hey, anything helps, just $1 or $2. He's feeding a drug habit, openly admitted to it. Yeah, of course I am. Methamphetamines are my biggest one. Some marijuana every now and then. I'm paying for that when I give him cash. That's what I'm paying for. I'm helping him to kill himself. Is Satan anesthetizing us against need? I would say very effectively. Because now my choice is I don't want to be defrauded, and I don't want to help them defraud someone else. So now I have to look at everybody skeptically. I have to wonder now, every single person that says that they've got need, now I have to wonder whether that's true or not. Because everybody seems to have their hand out saying that they have needs, and it turns out most of them choose to do that. Most of them are choosing to dupe us, hoping that we'll give just a couple of bucks to help them continue to do that. And I think that's so unfair. Because I would want to give. There are a lot of people that want to give. There are a lot of people that just have thrown their hands up and they give because it's easier than not giving. It just makes the problem go away. I'm saying Satan is working against us. So that's why Paul says, yes, when you have opportunity to do good to all. But, how did he finish the sentence? Especially to those who are of the household of faith. So we put our priority. I would love to help that person, but my priority is first in the church. I want to make sure everybody in the church. I'm not willing that a widow goes without firewood for the winter before I pay somebody a gas station $3. Sorry, my priority is on the widows in our church first. Okay? And that's what Paul's talking about. We have to put this in the right priority. The last verse I'm going to cover today is verse 13. It might be the same as the previous one. Distributing to the needs of the saints, and then ending here at the end of this same verse, given to hospitality. Paul doesn't list hospitality earlier as specifically a gift, but you know as well as I do that there are people that are gifted with hospitality. They are gregarious people. They are open. They want to have people come to their homes all the time. I know people that are like that, and they are always inviting people to their homes because they are naturally hospitable. And that is a sense of what's being talked about here, but not in the sense of it being a gift. Now, here's the thing that's different about this. Paul says that we all ought to be given to this thing. The word given has the sense of pursuing. We're supposed to be pursuing this. Regardless of whether we have the gift of hospitality or not, Paul says that our new man, this renovated spiritual temple, it needs to be gregarious. It needs to be pursuing hospitality with each other as a spiritual family. The term hospitality means the love of strangers. But in this context, the stranger isn't the person outside the church, it's the person in the church. You know exactly what I'm talking about because if you've been at a Feast of Tabernacles, you look across the room and there are a lot of people in there you don't know. They're strangers to you. We're supposed to be pursuing hospitality with them because we are all members of the bride of Christ. So we're supposed to be pursuing a relationship. How do you have a relationship with someone if you don't know them? If you don't extend your hand, say hello, introduce yourself. This means if you are introverted, you don't get to point at the extroverts in the room and say, that's all on you guys, because I'm an introvert and that's not my thing. Because Paul is saying all of us are to be pursuing this with each other. Strangers in this context, there's the strangers within our own church. And we have them. Sometimes they're in your own congregation where you may not know everybody. Okay? And so we're supposed to be pursuing hospitality, starts right here at home, with those in our own congregations. If I don't know them, then I am to pursue a relationship with them. That's what this means. Whether I'm introverted or not, you have to pursue relationships. in the church. That's the point. That's how we're to be bonded together. And that's a tool for us to use in bonding together. There simply isn't enough time in a sermon like this to cover all that Paul has to say on this topic of rebuilding our spiritual temples. There's not enough time. He set a high bar for us to strive for, that's for sure. But it's worth the effort to study the rest of this. Study the rest of Romans. All of Romans 12, read through all of that and carefully go through each of those words. Look up, what is he saying? He doesn't ever say the same thing differently 3 times in a row. They all mean something different. You'll enhance your understanding if you actually stop and look up all of those words. What did he mean? What does that mean? And then put them together in their proper context. It makes it so much easier as you prepare for the Passover. I think you'll benefit from that process. And I would add into that 1 Corinthians chapter 13 too. Go through the book on love, which is to be our foundation, the foundation of our spiritual temple. As I said at the beginning, God has called us out of this world and put us into a process of change. When we were baptized, we buried the old man and we began a new process. I know when I was baptized, Ken Loucks died, but Ken Loucks came up. He didn't change. That wasn't instantaneous. Do you think I came up and I was something else? Were you? You came up with all the baggage you had. Did you not? Did you leave it there? That'd be a wonderful miracle, except where would the growth be? Where's the durability in our character if we don't have to overcome anything? That's why we have to go through this process. We have to rebuild from the ground up, spiritually speaking. So we begin this process of change after baptism, a renovating and remodeling of our old self into something new, a new spiritual temple. We commit ourselves to spending the rest of our lives in this process as a living sacrifice, which is our rational worship of God.